Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Please keep your comments coming. I did eventually have a mammoth session of answering or replying to a load of comments the other day, so I'm pretty much up to date with all your comments. So yes, very much appreciate. Please keep them coming. Always like to get feedback on the show, what you think about the whiskies that I present and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, very, very much appreciated. Right, okay, so moving on to this week's episode of the show. As you know, a couple of weeks ago I did an episode on the Dornoch distillery, which is a fairly young distillery, which seems to have become quite or generated quite a cult following, and I thought it was very apt to do another episode of the show on another distillery that has indeed developed very much a cult following, and that's Ardnamurchan. And I was about to say another one of these sort of new distilleries, but in actual fact, do you realise this year is the 10th anniversary of the distillery? I mean, where the hell does all this time go? I mean, you know, it doesn't seem like yesterday that Ardnamurchan was sort of, you know, putting out their first release, and it's 10 years almost. I mean, wow. I mean, yeah, where does the time go? Obviously, their first release wasn't until 2020, so they've only really been sort of releasing bottlings for the last sort of like 3 or so 4 years, but they seem to have released quite a fair few, and I was hoping to include their latest release, the Midge, but unfortunately it probably got squashed in the post, unfortunately, or at least lost in the post. So unfortunately I wasn't able to include that, but I have, you know, as you can see, a fair few samples that the distillery have kindly sent me over the last year or so, along with a couple of samples from some good friends of mine, Andy Holbrook and Giles Murray, so thank you for those. I think this is only the second episode of the show I've done on Ardnamurchan. It just goes to show, you know, that distilleries may well have been around for years, and but just finding the time to sort of shoehorn an episode in is quite difficult, certainly when you only do one a week, that is. Anyway, I'm not going to go into sort of a great deal of depth about the distillery, because I've done that in the earlier episode of the show. I will say that obviously it's a very traditional sort of style of whiskey. It's not one of these sort of your newfangled mega estery early bottling jobbies. It's a much more traditional style, more barley accented, moderate fermentation, leading to a sort of quite cereally kind of new make, although had some nice fruit. And as we know, they sort of both do create peated and unpeated malt. So like I said, I wasn't going to say an awful lot about the distillery, so let's, as I've got quite a lot of cask strength bottlings here, let's just crack on and... Okay, so it was actually quite difficult to try and figure out what way round to do all of these. I think I've kind of cracked the lineup, but who knows. Anyway, we'll kick off with the AD Paul Launois third release bottling. So the reason I'm starting with this, even though it's 57.1, is it's 100% unpeated spirit. All the rest are their usual makeup of peated and unpeated. I believe roughly around about 50-50, although I think sometimes, certainly from tasting some of them, I think that they do kind of put in a little bit more peated malt on occasions. But anyway, so like I said, Paul Launois third release. So this is finished in so ex-bourbon cask, unpeated, finished in the well, this is what I don't actually know. I don't know. I did ask the question about the third release. So I tasted the first release, which was actually, I believe, a vatting of 8 or 9 champagne casks matured, and then they vatted in an unchampagne American oak cask to kind of, I guess, just keep the balance possibly. I don't know whether they've done the same here or not, whether it's a finish or whatever. Don't know is the honest answer, but we'll give it a taste and see if we can figure that one out. Like I said, bottle of 57.1%. Like I said, look at the colour of that. I don't know whether I'm doing this really in the right way, but this is the 50% bottling, so that's why I thought, well, yeah, okay, there's lots of sherry involved in all of these, but this is the AD sherry cask release from October of last year. It's aged, as you can see, Pedro Ximenez and ex Oloroso, and bottled at 50%. Probably should have done this close to the end, but like I said, now I've got a load of cask strength ones to work my way through. So on to the next bottling, which is the AD 0922. It's a real shame that the distillery have dropped all the sort of batch numbers, because that was really cool. That's what I really liked. But you know, they claimed they'd now got, I think it was about last year, I think it was, maybe a year before, I think, they claimed that the spirit was of a consistency that they didn't need to sort of put these codes on anymore, which is a bit of a shame, like I said. So this is from September of 2022. This is the AD 0922 cask strength bottling, bottled at 58.4%, aged in ex-American oak and then ex-sherry cask, both PX and Oloroso. Although again, looking at the colour of it, it's pretty light, so can't imagine. I would 10% sherry maybe. Certainly that's the makeup of the next cask strength release, which was bottled last year at 58.1%. This was definitely 90% bourbon and 10% sherry. Don't know if the sherry casks were both Oloroso and PX like the previous bottling, but we may well find out. And we're going to sort of move on to the AD 0817 cask 592. This is the Visitors Centre edition. It's peated malt, a single cask number 592, obviously. It was basically a first fill bourbon barrel, and then it was finished in a rum cask. It's bottled at 60.4%, distilled in August of 2017, bottled in 2023, and incidentally they did a sort of a core bottling at 50% that I thought about maybe using in this week's episode of the show, but I decided that I'd just stick with this one particular one. The final bottling of the afternoon is the AD 1022 Madeira cask release, bottled at 58.2%. It was bottled in October of 2022, and like I said, ex-American oak and finished in Madeira hogsheads. So yeah, nice range, and we'll kick off with the Launois. Right, okay, so Launois 3rd edition. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? That's a lovely nose. Sort of stripping out all of the peat really gives you that lovely fruitiness of the spirit, and then it's enhanced by the sort of leesy, champagne-y kind of notes. There's lots of vanilla. There is a lot of oak going on here, but I tell you what, the spirit is really standing up to it quite nicely. Really fragrant, really aromatic, apricot, a little bit of green gage there sitting in the background, obvious leesy champagne character. Just overall beautifully balanced, it has to be said. Lovely. Let's see what that's like. Right, kicks off with, wow, that's drying, that's masked. That feels a lot more than 57, I can tell you. So it kind of kicks off with the American oak. I get a lot of vanilla, almost corn-like notes to start off with. A bit of apple moves in, then we're into that sort of leesy, champagne-y kind of character, the white fruits, marzipan, a little bit of ginger. It's got a lovely kind of minerality that almost kind of tingles on the tongue. Well, obviously that's the alcohol as well. but it's weird, that sort of tingling sensation kind of almost feels like the sort of sensation of champagne bubbles on the tongue. It's just, I love this. Oh, it's a beautiful whiskey, it has to be said. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Okay, so less oaky now, although in saying that, the marzipan-y notes have got a lot sweeter. Less of the champagne notes as well, less of that sort of leesy kind of, almost kind of biscuity, sort of brioche sort of character. So a little bit more earthy, a little bit more barleyed, a little bit more as their sort of new make. I mean, I've tasted the unpeated new make, and this is kind of very much in that kind of style, quite traditional, sort of barleyed, but just absolutely gorgeous, it has to be said. Touch of spice, so pass like that. Almost a touch of peat. It's kind of weird. It's kind of more earth, but it does feel slightly peaty. Although, like I said, I'm pretty certain this was unpeated spirit. Certainly batch 1 was unpeated. I mean, there may be a little bit of peated spirit in here. Like I said, don't know. Might be my palate that's playing games on me. But anyway, again, less oaky, less of the champagne, more barley, more sort of naturalistic fruit, lovely depth. There is that champagne-y note is there, but it's really kind of been relegated now to very much on the finish. It was, like I said, the oak has kind of just softened off, dropped off, and we're now getting more of the sort of the spirit character, which is bloody gorgeous, it has to be said. Okay, so let's move on to the AD Sherry Cask release. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Well, would you be surprised if I said there was a lot of sherry here? Yeah, okay. Lots of earthy, burnt treacle, raisinated fruits. It's quite sweet, but the alcohol is just sort of like taking the edge off the sweetness. The peat is actually quite fragrant, but I mean that's kind of the sweetness of the sherry cask is giving it that sort of fragrant sweetness. There's no distillery character, it has to be said. It is peat and sherry. It's nice peat and sherry, it has to be said. And if you're going to do sherry, I do it with a big chunk of peat. So let's see what the pass on. Oh, you can feel those tannins building. You're sort of holding it in your mouth and you're just sort of like, God, those tannins are really increasing in intensity. It's pretty much, again, like the nose would suggest, it's peat and it's sherry. It's raisinated fruits, it's treacle, it's burnt toffee. It's got a nice sweetness which kind of offsets that tannic character on the mid palate. And it sort of, the alcohol kind of kicks in on the sort of like the finish. Doesn't really need any water. I mean, again, it's sort of one of these things where I think the sort of, well, we'll put a little drop of water with it. I don't normally bother with 50% ones, but the alcohol is quite noticeable, and I think it's kind of keeping a check on the sweetness. Yeah, it's not quite so sweet on the nose now. It's very much as it was, but kind of quite a little bit less sweetness. See what it pounds like. Yeah, it's a bit softer, it's a bit rounder, it's a bit homogeneous now, to be fair. There's less of that sort of spice intensity, there's less tannins, obviously, and like I said, I didn't really think it needed any water. It kind of lengthens it, I suppose. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts, really. It's kind of, do you want it sort of like, you know, quite intense, quite tannic, quite spicy, but a little bit on the short side, or do you want it a little bit more homogeneous and a bit longer? You know, it's kind of, you pick your poison, as they say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 0922 cask strength release. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Very little sherry, funnily enough. There's a little bit of it. It's adding sort of a touch of kind of black coffee and black pepper, but it's wonderfully aromatic. There's a little bit of youthfulness to the spirit. There's a little bit of rose petal, some gristy barley. It's got that youthful kind of character. The peat is relatively subtle in actual fact. It's quite oily in character. Certainly doesn't feel as intensely peated as the previous bottling. Maybe this was lighter peat. Maybe this was a little bit more unpeated spirit to peated spirit, possibly. Maybe sort of 60-40 possibly, or maybe even as far as 70-30 possibly, because the peat is really quite subtle, but it's quite earthy, quite loamy, nicely balanced, it has to be said. Let's see what that's like. A little bit more peat intensity on the palate, quite gristy, quite young, intense, a little bit of rose petal, loads of spice, peppery spice, I mean really intense peppery spice. Again, touch of tobacco, black coffee, a little bit of raisinated fruit, wonderful intensity, it has to be said. And let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. It's kind of taken the edge off that youthfulness. It's kind of brought out more fleshy apricot, apple. A little bit more peat is noticeable as well. Still quite earthy. There is that element of youthful rose petal, but it's certainly sort of a lot more further down in the mix, should we say. That's nice. Let's see what Pat's like now. Again, like the nose, it's not quite so overtly young and youthful. A little bit more straw, a little bit more barley. Not a great deal of peat. The peat seems to have kind of almost completely disappeared. There's a kind of echo of kind of earthiness on the sort of mid palate and through into the finish, but it's pretty much gone. But yeah, I kind of like that. I think overall it's a really impressive bottling. It's a little young, it has to be said. But you know, you have to love the intensity of that. Right, okay, so let's move on to the second cask strength release from 2023, 58.1. Let's see what one of those gives us on this end, shall we? Now, there's a little bit more maturity than there was in the previous bottling. There's still a little bit of rose petal, more peat. Getting a lot more peat, a lot more earthiness. There's some almost mentholy kind of notes, a little bit of malt biscuit, treacle. It's almost honeyed as well. I mean, this is this is showing a lot of, I wouldn't say improvement. Improvement is the wrong word to use, but evolution. That's probably a better word to use. It's more evolved than the previous bottling. I would guess a little bit more mature than the previous bottling as well. Certainly doesn't quite have that overt youthfulness, and it's a bit fuller and a bit richer. Let's see what the parts are now. quite masked, but really quite peated on the finish. Yeah, more noticeable peat, dry peat, earthy peat, dusty peat. Not getting so much of that rose petal. It's still quite full, quite sort of apricot-y, quite rich. I get the impression that once you put a little bit of water with that, it will really kind of bring itself out, because it's quite closed in at the moment. The peat is actually really quite astringent and really noticeable. It really lingers after the alcohol is kind of like just masked everything, but the peat is just hanging on in there. It's really quite impressive, it has to be said. And like I said, shows quite a bit more evolution than the previous cask strength release. So let's put a little drop of water and see what that does. That's brought out some lovely sweetness. Again, there's that sort of almost honeyed kind of character coming out. There's a little bit more edginess to the peat. It's less earthy. It kind of shows a more astringent kind of character. And this is possibly, I would imagine, I don't know what maltings they use for their peated barley, but it feels like the peat is slightly different. And this is it, unless I guess you go to a maltings and say, we want peat coming from X, Y, and Z, you're kind of, to a certain extent, at the mercy of their peated barley, where they get their peat from. I'm sure that they don't sort of, like I said, it could come from sort of, how many is there? Is there 9 licensed peat bogs in Scotland, I think? I think of which about 4 or 5 are on the mainland, I think. Anyway, yeah, it's certainly more intense on the peat side, and certainly feels more evolved. Let's see what that's like. That's good. Really chewy now, really kind of peaty and malty and chewy and intense, but soft as well. More fruit, more apricot, more of that honey, although it's not overly sweet. It's kind of a soft, subtle sweetness. I mean, it really is a chewy mouthful, it has to be said. I mean, it is not shy and retiring at all. It's intense, and it kind of just coats the mouth with this sort of lovely, oily sort of distillery character. I mean, that is just that bloody good. I mean, the previous cask strength release was good, but that's obviously got a little bit more maturity under its belt, and I'm just looking forward to seeing that cask strength release continue, and hopefully the spirit they will release slightly older spirit as they get there, because but you don't know that I'm feeling more for you. Okay, so moving slightly off on a tangent, this is the Visitor Centre rum cask finish. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, can we? Oh yes, you can smell that rum. It's got that kind of agricole character, that sort of herbal, astringent sort of agricole note. There's some sweet apricot, there's some banana, barley. The peat is quite hidden, actually. I mean, it's there. It's you can smell it, but it's kind of sort of wrapped up in this kind of agricole kind of character. It's got green fruit, green banana. Yeah, I like that. It's real sort of like intense. It's kind of like very natural. It's that sort of. You tend to get sort of some of the rums can be, well, I mean, Diplomatico is sweetened post distillation, and they are pretty sweet, and they're lovely rums, it has to be said. But then you sort of like get one of those sort of more sort of natural. I mean, natural is the wrong word, because it kind of infers that the Diplomatico is unnatural, but it's not. It's just what I'm talking about. Unmolested rum. No, maybe I shouldn't say that. You know what I'm getting at. But anyway, coming back to this, let's dig myself out of this hole. This is bloody good. I mean, it really is. Like I said, I mean, I love this nose. Great intensity. Let's see what the pal's like. Oh, that's chewy. It's a lot sweeter, a lot more of that sweeter rummy kind of character. Not sugar sweet, but natural sweetness. Fructose, you know. It's got that sort of slightly banana, green banana, ripe banana, apricot. There's that slight sort of it's less kind of agricole, although there's that earthy peat, there's that there's an almost minerality as well. A sort of it's the first time I've kind of really noticed that sort of Highland granity, minerally kind of character in the Ardnamurchan, but that really has it. Touch of baked apple, again quite masked. I think that needs some water. Let's put a little drop with it and see what that does to the nose. That's really brought out that kind of granity Highland minerality, and it's like I said, I've not noticed it that intensely in the Ardnamurchan character, it has to be said. There's less peat. The rum is kind of a little bit more oily, a little sweeter. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the 50% of rum cask core bottling that they did not so long ago. A little bit more cereal as well. Let's see what the pal's like now. Softer, more mentholated, more herbal on the finish, less intense agricole, less intense rum, a lot softer, but it still has that sort of, like I said, that slight sort of mentholated agricole character that comes through on the finish, although it's a lot more rounder, a lot more honeyed, a lot fuller. I think personally, I think I prefer it neat. I think I prefer more of that intensity of character, but either way, great whiskey. Right, okay, so on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. This is the Madeira cask release. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's a lovely nose. Really generous and oily and fruity. Almost estery. I'm getting lime, I'm getting sort of apple, pear, green gage. But it's got this lovely astringent herbal character as well. Quite soft on the Madeira. The Madeira is it is biscuity, it is kind of classic Madeira notes, but it kind of doesn't quite have that edge. Good thing in my personal opinion. It's got that softness of Madeira. Touch of coffee, a little bit of herbal peat. I mean, that's actually really quite rounded, quite soft, quite fruity. Like I said, almost estery, which is slightly unusual, I think, for Ardnamurchan, and it's obviously the way the spirit has interreacted with the cask. Yeah. Let's see what it passes on. Kind of kicks off with more of the Madeira cask with that. I'm getting that more of that hard biscuity kind of character. But it's got a luscious juiciness which is kind of kicking in on the mid palate, a little bit of spice, more biscuits. It's a bit more on the mask side, 58%. Again, getting that kind of granity, tongue tingling sort of citric aftertaste. Let's put a little drop of water, see what that does to it. A lot more Madeira cask now, a lot more of that rich and biscuity, slightly edgy kind of Madeira character. It's a Madeira can sometimes kind of come across more austere, less kind of robust and juicy and fruity and all that kind of thing. And it's kind of, that's what's happened here. It's almost more sort of cask and less spirit. Spirit is kind of, I mean, I'm getting some almost kind of rye-like peppery notes as well. It's kind of almost kind of emphasised the oak, both sort of American and the Madeira, and it's the spirit has kind of just kind of gone a little bit AWOL, I think. Let's see what we pass on. Softer, juicier, still more oak, more biscuitiness, more intensity. Not quite so edgy, more softer. I mean, that's interesting. It does go to show that although Ardnamurchan has got quite a sort of intensity of character, the spirit character anyway, it's still basically, you know, playing second fiddle here to the Madeira cask. But either way, you know, I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's and I think that was it. It's kind of interesting to see how the spirit interacts with all these different cask types. And I wouldn't say it kind of loses out to the Madeira, but the Madeira does seem to sort of be a little bit more intense in character. So, well, but then you've got that sherry monster. So what the hell am I talking about? Anyway, let's sum today's episode of the show up. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to the distillery for the samples for today's episode of the show, and to Andy and to Giles as well. You know, it's, you know, without the support of you guys and the distilleries, obviously there's going to be no episode of the show. And I know there's obviously, with the distilleries, there's always a kind of commercial angle, and, you know, one tries to, when one has one's buying hat on, tries to sort of like, you know, purchase when I feel that the time is right, and when the sort of spirit sort of, when I get behind it and sort of, you know, sell it, I suppose. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to the distillery and to my good friends Andy and Giles for the samples for today's episode of the show. Your support is very much appreciated, and obviously without the support of all of you guys and everybody that watches the show, there would be no show at all, and it would be a bit of a shame, really, I think. Anyway, so today's lineup. Loved the Paul Launois, loved the sort of the champagne character, how it kind of interacts with the character of the spirit. A little bit of water, it kind of like sort of lessens some of that champagne-y kind of character, but it's really intriguing, and it's unique. Well, not totally unique. There are other whiskies that have been, although I don't really know too many. Madeira is the one that springs to mind that's used champagne cask, but there's obviously a love of the champagne. I know that certainly the distillery has now started distributing the Paul Launois champagne. I've not tasted the champagne itself, but you know, I think that the whiskey, bloody good. The sherry cask release, probably my least favoured. I mean, and are you surprised? I suppose at the end of the day, it was very much peat and sherry. It kind of obviously plays to a certain sort of fan base, shall we say, that loves peat and sherry, and if you love peat and sherry, you're going to love it. It's, yeah, absolutely fine. The first of the two cask strength bottlings, although the funny thing was, and I'll probably, you know, kind of bring both of them in at the end of the day, although there was only kind of a year between the two releases, there was quite a big gap with regards to what I perceived to be sort of maturity. The AD sort of the 2022 bottling was very much, well, I don't want to say raw, but there was that sort of like, you know, youthful, rose-petally, sort of slightly raw spirit kind of character. I mean, it was a nice bottling, it has to be said, but there was that sort of rawness there. But then the second bottling that was released, you know, literally a year later or so, suddenly that rawness seems to have dissipated, and we're now in that sort of rich kind of fruity kind of character, and like I said, there may be a little bit more peat than the previous one, but you know, it just seemed to show a lot more evolution, and I'm really looking forward to sort of how that bottling carries on. The Visitor Centre's edition, the rum cask, really worked very, very nicely. It just kind of like, I'm guessing ex-agricole rum cask, I might be wrong there, but it certainly came across like an agricole rum finish. Put a little drop of water with it, you kind of lose a little bit of that sort of agricole kind of character, and it's more sweetness and richness and fruitiness. And like I said, it's the first time in all of these it really kind of, I got that granity kind of Highland character kind of coming through. Very, very good cask, it has to be said. The Madeira finish, yeah, again, kind of worked, well, sort of, maybe a little bit heavy on the Madeira. Maybe that was kind of a cask type a little bit too far for the spirit, who knows. Interesting experiment. Certainly neat that the Madeira wasn't quite so edgy as it can be. Put a little drop of water with it and it did kind of bring out that sort of slight edginess. But I like the fact that the distillery is kind of, you know, trying out some different things, experimenting, seeing what works. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of that particular bottling, but I at the end of the day, all I can say is that Ardnamurchan is producing, by and large, some bloody good whiskey, and you really, really should buy it. That's all I can say. If you've not experienced Ardnamurchan, don't know about it, just see if you can get hold of a bottle. It doesn't matter, even if it's just the kind of I hate to say the word bog standard. No, that's the wrong word. Core release. The core release is a lovely whiskey. It has to be said. And if you can get hold of a bottling of that and just try it, I think you'll really enjoy it. So at the end of the day, I'm a big fan. So not a great deal else more to say apart from thank you for watching. This has been a really fun episode of the show. Good dramming. Good afternoon.
And with you we were going back to our homes. Suddenly you stopped and said to me,